as the party against taxes, the party for small government, all of that.
Yeah.
What you see in Mr. Trump is the same old Republican story, but carried much further. It's a little bit like the Republican Party always allowed the southern white population to leave the Democratic Party and come over. But they didn't pander to white supremacy. Mr. Trump did. You know, the hostility to foreigners that you could get from the Republican Party is taken further. Trump defined himself as different. I'm going to give you more than any Republican ever did, and you've got to let me do more than you might. And so people say that in different ways, but that's the deal. Look, the Democratic Party isn't that different. It also supports private enterprise and capitalism, but it makes the alliance based on a different group of people: women, highly educated people, black and brown people. You know, we all kind of know, if you pay much attention, the Democrats say to the big shots, support us because we will bring in, and they will all, like Nancy Pelosi in that famous moment during the campaigns a few years ago, when she's at a college and a young student stands up and says, you know, to her, what do you think about socialism? They're obviously affected by Bernie and all of that. And she doesn't, you can see the camera's right on her. So she doesn't know quite what to say. And she's fumbling, which she's pretty well spoken, so this was unusual. And finally it comes out. She looks kind of befuddled and looks right at the young man and says, we're all capitalists now.
Wow.
And that she's right. That's exactly, we're all of them, those folks, and their job is to build the alliance that gets you the votes. And so you sit. And when you don't do it well enough, then the other one. Trump comes along, breaks all of this by saying, I'm going way further in building that alliance, and I'm going to get enough people that I'm going to blow the rest of you out of the water.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that going further thing, because you're not wrong, at least based on what we've seen so far. Republicans in Congress want to extend Trump's existing tax cuts, which are set to expire at the end of the year.
Right.
If passed, it'll cost an estimated $4.5 trillion.
Yes.
But it disproportionately will reduce taxes for the wealthy. Now, the further part seems to be that in order to pay for it, they're considering slashing Medicaid, gutting parts of the Affordable Care Act. I mean, they're going further and deeper than we've seen in recent years. But how does that jive with the populist promises he made? Again, he's telling lots of people, your life's bad now, it'll get better under me. But if they lose health care and high quality medical services, how is their life better?
It isn't. And
how does he sell that, though?
Mr. Trump is well, he sells it to the people in the end he has to. That's the employer class. Look, in 2017, when Mr. Trump was president and got them this tax cut, it was then the biggest tax cut we've seen, emphasizing the corporations and the rich. It came at the end of a 40-year period, unequaled in American history, for redistributing wealth and income up, away from the poor, away from the middle, to the Musks and the Bezoses and all of them.
Yeah.
And as an economist, I can tell you, never did we need a tax cut for corporations and the rich less than 2017 when they got it. Now they want to keep it because it had a sunset provision. Now they want to keep it in this year. If he's going to do that, the only way he can deliver to them, or to use his language, I'm going to make you all rich. Exactly. The only way he can do that now is to savage the public sector. Where else is he going to get the money?
And then when the public realizes it, is it just too late? How do they reconcile that?
Mr. Trump won't be with us when they figure that out.
Fair enough. You mentioned Elon Musk. He has not just been a public cheerleader for Donald Trump. He's been brought into the fold in very concrete ways, kind of to help dismantle the federal government. They've gutted entire departments, including aid agency, USAID, as well as the Department of Veterans Affairs. They've terminated thousands of contracts, and they're set to lay off tens of thousands of workers in what might be effectively the biggest job cut in U.S. history. Mm-hmm. They're not done.
No.
They're setting sights on the U.S. Department of Education.
But again, think like an employer for a minute, even if it doesn't come to you naturally.
Yeah.
It doesn't come to me naturally either. For an employer, this is nirvana because he's not going to have to tax them. Look, he has to deliver that to them. How's he going to do it? He could borrow the money. That's what his predecessors did. But we are now at a level of debt this country has never seen. It's becoming a scary problem because if the rest of the world no longer lends to the United States government to cover its deficits, what are we going to do? Let's remember that for many, many people, you get paid less if you work for the government than if you go in the private sector. And the compensation for that was job security. What Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk are doing, more than what the workers are that they fire, is they've taken that security away. Where do you think public employees are going to go if either they've lost their job, which is happening to tens of thousands, or they're scared silly that they might lose their job? They're going to go into the private sector. Where else are they going to go? Which means they're going to drive down wages and working conditions in the private sector. Because the worker who comes from the private sector, laid off after 5, 10 years, that means not only your job is gone, your income is gone, but your career ladder has just been yanked out from under you. So you're desperate, you're worried. You will offer yourself one way or another for less money than the person who's in that private sector job now.
Let me reach over here and put on my red MAGA hat for a second.
Okay.
I'm going to represent the position of Trump, potentially.
Good.
Yeah, we're cutting taxes for the richest among us. Yes, we're giving more and more benefits to corporations, but that will create jobs. That will allow us to take risks. That will allow us to spark innovation. That will allow us to create the next big market that will allow for, more wealth for everybody. If we build a new internet, if we build a new auto industry, if we build a new thing, everybody gets a job, everybody wins, more money's on the table.
This was a reasonable argument. I don't think it was ever true. I'm a professor of economics. I've studied it all my life. What you're saying is a nice way, better way than they usually do, for what used to be called trickle-down economics. You help the folks at the top, you boost the profits, you give them a tax cut, and it'll trickle down to a good job for me and all that. I'm going to be more nice now than I ought to be. There was a grain of truth to that, but it isn't anymore. And that's perhaps the most important thing that I can tell you. And I'll say it as bluntly as I know how. The American empire is over. We're done. We peaked about 12, 15 years ago, and we are on a down. And it's very hard for the American people, which I understand. I am one. It's hard to get your head around that. We've had a century of on the way up, which is a lot more fun than on the way down. But it does happen to every empire. We're only the latest. Look at the British, how far they've fallen. We're in that process. So the problem with the trickle down is, yeah, there might be more jobs, but they're going to be created in China. They're going to be created in Brazil. They're going to be created in India. They're not created here.
How do you compare this moment of slashing, particularly in the federal government, to, say, the 90s when Bill Clinton did something somewhat similar?
Right.
Is this just a partisan disagreement, or are there substantive differences?
No. Again, and I know this is difficult for people to hear, this is a cut based on desperation. This is an economy that is indeed, we have the greatest level of corporate debt this country has ever seen, off the chart. The greatest level of personal debt, and we have the greatest level of government debt. Our government debt is now trillions of dollars greater than our annual output. That was not the case in the 20th century. It is the case now. What you're seeing is desperation politics. The whole Trump phenomena ought to say to you, wait a minute, these jerky moves that are out of whack, right? In recent days, we have seen the decision of the Trump administration to kiss the war in Ukraine goodbye. We're not doing that no more because we can't afford it. We can't keep funding a war, which, by the way, the West is losing, as anybody who pays attention knows. All of these things are signs Of what? Of a country that is in trouble and is turning on its friends because it can to save itself. We're going to take over, we're going to get your energy for nothing. We're going to, make you build the wall, Hugh, in Mexico. Look what the genius in a way of Mr. Trump is that without understanding it, because clearly he doesn't, he feels in his own way, the way lots of people do, that there's something that necessitates going way beyond what has been done because our need as a society is beginning to show up. Look, let me give you a simple example. The best electric vehicles in the world right now, by uniform global agreement, are produced by something called the BYD Corporation, which probably most folks have never heard of, which is Chinese. BYD, the initials, BYD. They make the best quality, cheapest electric car and truck. All right. You don't see them anywhere in the United States. Why not? Because Mr. Trump put a 27% tariff on them, and Mr. Biden raised it to 100%. So let me give you an example. Wow. If you wanted to buy a $30,000 BYD electric vehicle, which you could do, that's what they charge. That's why it's so good. You would have to pay $30,000 to get the Chinese to ship it here. Then you'd have to give another $30,000, 100%, tariff to Uncle Sam, or in this case, Uncle Don, in the way of a tariff. So it would cost you $60,000, which you're not going to do because you can get a less good Tesla or GM or Ford or anybody else at $40,000 to $50,000, which is less than you'd have to pay. But here's the problem.
I was going to say, because right now this sounds like a good plan to a lot of people. Trump has said, I'm going to do this not just to China, although he's going to double existing tariffs to China, obviously, right, but Mexico, Canada, everybody. If we intensify the tariffs, the scenario you just painted will happen, and people will be forced to buy U.S. stuff,
right?
Which then it creates U.S. jobs, which again stimulates the economy.
All right, let me be the economist. Okay, that's good for the Tesla company, which I'm sure is purely coincidental, and GM and Ford and the others. Good. And they'll maybe be able to hold on to some jobs. Good. But now let's follow the bouncing ball, because that's my job as an economist. Yeah. Everywhere else in the world, every company in Asia, Africa, Latin America that competes with an American company that has to buy a truck as part of its business will go to China and buy the best truck at the lowest price, $30,000, the best truck. No American company that competes with them will do that. And you know what that means? Those companies will be able to charge a lower price because they have better inputs than the American company, which doesn't. In the long run, that will lose Americans' jobs left and right as they're outcompeted by all the rest of the world that can go and buy, and is buying, BYD trucks. If you go to Europe right now and you go on the auto routes all over Europe, you'll see BYD cars and trucks. America is shooting itself in the foot. It may be great politics for Mr. Trump. I'm helping the auto companies and the workers. He'll go to Michigan and give us... Yeah, but what you're doing is diminishing the capability of the United States to hold on at a time when its footprint in the world is shrinking. If you take the United States together with the other G7 countries, that used to be the dominant bloc of the world, right? The United States, let's just enumerate them so everybody knows. Canada, Japan, Germany, France, Italy, and Britain, okay? The G7, and I'm going to add up all the GDP, gross domestic product, total output of goods and services of all of those 7 countries, U.S. and its major allies. And now I'm going to compare it to the gross added up GDPs of China and its allies, known now as the BRICS. Okay, you add up the United States, about 28% of world output. You add up China and the BRICS, it's 35% of the world output. We aren't the wealthiest bloc in the world. We're number 2. And that's new. And that changes everything. Every country in Asia, Africa, Latin America trying to figure out who to go to borrow money from, who to go to cut a deal with, who to go to sell your exports, who to go to invest in your railroads. You know where they used to go? Washington, London, Paris, of course. Now they go there.
But they go to India and Brazil. And
That's right. They go to Sao Paulo, New Delhi, Beijing, and they ask, can you give us a better deal? And here's the news I got to give you. They get the better deals. And they go that way. And that's not going to stop. And you can rattle your sabers all over the board. You put the 7th Fleet in the South China Sea. Isn't going to change that. You've got to come to terms with that, but we are led by people who don't want to do that because nobody wants to be the politician who has to explain to the people it's over.